Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to episode 81 of the Falcoholic Live. I am, of course, your host, Kevin Knight, and joined tonight by special guest, David Walker. You know him as DW, at Falcoholic DW on Twitter, the host of the illustrious The Falcoholic podcast, my colleague in arms in this, wide world of internet prognosticating. So, DW, how are you doing this evening?
I'm great, Kevin.
Good. Glad to have you here. I see a AMD Ryzen box in the back. Are you doing some computer building, perhaps?
I am not done yet, but
very cool. No. We'll have to discuss this off screen. This is the bonus feature, but we are going to talk about this third preseason game, or fourth preseason game for the Falcons, third week, quote unquote, of the preseason. Talk a little roster construction because I won't be doing another show before we do final cuts, but we'll talk about, kind of what we think of the state of the roster heading into this final preseason game. And then, for the real degenerates that are going to actually watch this thing on Thursday, we're going to talk about, some players maybe to keep an eye on. So let's kick things off with a little recap of last week's game. We can start on the offensive side of the ball. To you, DW, who was your player of the game, someone that you thought really stood out in a good way for the Falcons?
I don't think anyone was particularly flashy. There were a few guys that had, spot play here and there. I think the player who I was most pleased by overall was Matt Gono. I've written a lot about him at the Falcoholic, so I'm going to lean on that prediction. I predicted last week that he would be the starter at right tackle for the season, and I leaned into that based off his performance. He gave up, some plays, but he actually played fairly well. And I think the big thing is he looked much better than Sombrero had looked all preseason. And of course, this is coming along with the news that McGarry is getting healthy, is going to potentially play Thursday night. But my thinking was Gono is the best option of the three based on health, performance, and I think he showed that to us. So I was happy with how he played.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Gono. I mean, when you're talking about a second-year undrafted player, the expectation level for what they're going to produce is very low. I mean, a lot of these types of players the Falcons will bring back for maybe a season or two, but few of them ever end up on the roster. It's more of like a developmental thing, and we'll see what happens. And we always knew that there was something there with Gono because they gave him a huge bonus to sign as an undrafted player, one of the highest, definitely the highest on the team last year. I think it was like $80K, which is I think 80% of their allotted bonus money for all of their undrafted free agents. So it was clear that they were serious about him and that they really liked him. And they ended up carrying him on the roster all season, which is another way of saying, hey, this guy, we really like him. And tackle, offensive tackle is a premium position, one that you have to invest very high picks in a lot of times to get even a competent starter. So to dig up a diamond in the rough at offensive tackle as an undrafted free agent is just huge. It's huge for this team. So if he is a starting caliber player, I mean, that creates a lot of flexibility for the Falcons, particularly in 2020. I don't think it is going to affect the roster all that much this year. I mean, I think Gono was going to make the roster either way, but it has some interesting long-term, possible scenarios where the team could, just decide, okay, we're ready to move on from Sombrero in 2020 because, hey, Matt Gono is our swing tackle now, and we have McGarry ready to go. So it's a good situation to have extra good offensive tackle when a lot of teams don't even have two.
And cheap.
Yeah, dirt cheap. Yeah, that's how I like. No. Offensive tackles, folks. Get your mind out of the gutter. Get your mind out of the gutter. Okay. We're getting started here with the spicy takes to open things up, but on the flip side of that, I would say talking about a player that maybe wasn't so impressive has to be Giorgio Tavecchio for me. I guess that's technically special teams. I mean, but yeah. I know a lot of people wanted to have us talk about Tavecchio and what we think about that, so I will let you get the first word here on Tavecchio, DW, because people have heard me talk about it. But what are your thoughts on that situation now?
It's disappointing. And we can't talk about Tavecchio without fans also wanting to talk about Matt Bryant, and I don't know that that's a fair assessment. Tavecchio did well last year in relief of Bryant when Bryant was hurt. I don't think it's a binary conversation. When we talk about Tavecchio struggling, it doesn't mean, they made the wrong decision. It doesn't mean that Matt Bryant needs to be called immediately. Matt Bryant is 44, and he was experiencing back and hamstring issues. Those things don't heal faster when you get into your 40s. And the fact that he's someone that has not been signed yet by any other team. There are a lot of teams desperate for kicker. I think that puts the Matt Bryant conversation into a different category. As for Tavecchio, it's disappointing. We thought here's a relatively young guy, potentially has 10, 15 years that he could be kicking in the league if he plays well, and he's not living up to that. And he is on very thin ice, although I think people got the wrong impression when Blair Walsh was brought in. I don't think he's immediately going to replace Tavecchio, and I think how he performed in camp this week was a perfect sign of that. But yeah, it's disappointing. I was hoping he would be someone that we could count on for long term, and right now I think this fourth preseason game could actually be critical for him, because I think this will be one where they're going to want to see if he can start putting these balls in the right place.
Yeah. Man, we're getting spicy early on this show. This is but, no, I do know what you mean. Get your mind out of the gutter, folks. Yeah, I mean, this game is absolutely critical for Tavecchio because he has instilled no confidence. Back when he was missing only these 50-plus yarders, and one of them was tipped. We were talking about a handful of misses. It was like, okay, you could kind of squint and be like, well, it's not great, but like it's not enough to totally abandon your plans. But then missing that short kick and just generally looking totally rattled, the Falcons basically had no choice but to bring in somebody else to compete, quote unquote. And then if he doesn't put together a good game in game 4, like if he misses another kick, he's probably done.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So he just can't, and I feel bad for the guy because I did like him and he played really well to end last season, and based on the film, he looked like a trustworthy kicker, and those aren't exactly easy to find. So the Falcons thought, oh, it's the perfect situation. We have our guy here in the building. He can just take over for Bryant, who we don't trust to stay healthy anymore. And that would have been great if it worked out, and maybe it still could, but the early returns are not that great. But I know people want to talk about the Falcons signing Matt Bryant, and while Blair Walsh, like, he's a veteran, I don't think he's like any sort of actual plan. I think he's like just the team being like, okay, we have to bring in someone to push Tavecchio. Maybe he needs someone to push him. Maybe that's what he needs. But like if Tavecchio falls flat on his face, they're probably just going to sign somebody actually good right before the season starts when the contract isn't fully guaranteed. And that could be Bryant. It could also be like someone like Young Ho Koo or whatever, who they brought in for a visit but decided not to sign at this time.
Carly Boyd.
Yeah. So that there are other kickers out there. I personally really think Young Ho Koo kind of got a raw deal and maybe deserved a little bit more of a chance than he got. But kicking is brutal, man. I'm telling you, like, it's a tough job, and people have no patience for missed kicks. So that's tough. Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. And I know I want to talk about my son Jermaine Grace because I've been calling for Jermaine Grace to make the roster since like April. And really he probably should have made it that first year we brought him in, but we had to keep Duke Riley. So to be fair, Duke Riley actually did play really well in this game for like the first time in forever. So that, kind of weakens my argument a little bit. But what are your thoughts on Jermaine Grace, and do you think that he's almost a roster lock at this point?
I think so. He's someone that Dan Quinn has talked up a lot in camp as well. He is, according to PFF, he is one of the highest rated coverage linebackers out there right now in the preseason. And we saw that, you saw that in the pass breakups, the interception. The guy's got, really great speed. He's up there with, Devondre and Dion and his ability to cover a lot of ground quickly. And honestly, I think he's going to get a spot on the roster in large part because Bruce Carter has not done anything to earn his spot on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
I think Duke Riley will get one more year for them to see if he can take that step and actually learn to take angles and wrap up tackles.
Yeah.
I'm not holding my breath, but I think he'll get another shot. But yeah, I think Grace makes the 53-man roster this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see Riley inactive and Grace active, because I think he's actually past Duke Riley as far as trust at the linebacker position with the coaches already.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, I think this last game was super important for Duke Riley because he finally put together like a strong performance overall. It wasn't just like one flash play. Like he was absolutely key in preventing those 2 touchdowns and keeping those out of the end zone. Like he was a key force on those plays. He just did a good job and did what he was supposed to do. But like before that, he just had not made a single play this preseason. And, he'd gotten passed up by a 6th rounder. He got passed up by like a street free agent, to actually play meaningful snaps. And that's just a bad look going into like your 4th season, or your 3rd season, I guess it is. Last week was a really important game. And I think Thursday will also be important for him. He just needs to continue showing like something, but he was helped out a lot by Bruce Carter kind of falling on his face during the preseason, because Carter, when I was at training camp, was playing very well. Wow, the chat's getting spicy tonight. This is just going to be the spicy episode. I'm going to go in and change the title and be spicy preseason takes with Kevin and DW. But it's talking about Duke Riley, very not spicy up until last week. With Bruce Carter like really failing, I think that's basically opened the door to actually give Riley an opportunity to make the team again. So maybe it'll work out. All right, who is a defensive player that caught your eye for the Falcons?
I'm not going to say a particular player, but the entire defensive line, I think, deserves credit for showing up big time in that 3rd preseason game. From top to bottom, you just saw every guy contribute, and that was really encouraging. It's one of the first times I felt like, hey, the Falcons have some depth at defensive line. You've got Deidre Snot getting back there and fighting for that roster spot that people were saying that he may not get this year. He had that forced fumble that Tack ended up catching and running back. I think the defensive line as a unit stood out in a significant way. And you can say, okay, it was Washington and all that stuff, but realistically, they had a really strong performance as a unit, especially in the first quarter and a half into the first half. I was really impressed by that entire defensive front. Yeah.
I mean, how nice is it to actually have a defensive line that in preseason can actually get pressure? Like, I feel like this is not something we've seen in so long. Like, it's been like, oh, well, there's the opposing team's quarterback. They have like a million years to throw. Okay. And the defense just gets shredded in the second half. And that really hasn't been the case for the Falcons. I think the only games they've really allowed a bunch of points in the second half have been the ones where, they turn it over on offense a bunch of times, which has happened, when they fired up the simulator and I guess the Danny Etling experience, that's bound to happen. But, as a whole, the defensive line has been really good. It's a really encouraging sign to see the Falcons starters produce a lot of pressure, and the depth guys. I mean, we're looking at 2 guys like an Austin Larkin and Durant Miles at the edge position, where maybe one of them has a chance to make the roster, maybe neither of them really. And that's, I think, 2 guys that might deserve to be on rosters heading into the season, and hopefully one of them can make it to the practice squad if we can't keep them. But those guys have really impressed, and like you said, Deidre Snot needs more respect, I think, because you can like Justin Zimmer's athleticism as much as the next guy, but if I want someone to go on the football field and make plays, it's Deidre Snot 100% of the time. Like, I don't know what else he has to do on game days to like prove that he's better than undrafted guys and Terrell McClain. Like, that was football malpractice to make Deidre Snot an inactive and march out Terrell McClain. So
that was brutal.
Yeah, that was a bad decision. But yeah, I just the defensive line I think is really strong, and for them not really investing like a lot of resources in it over the course of the offseason, kind of just banking on development once again. And it didn't work out for them last season. The pass rush was not consistent, but maybe this is the year that it all comes together, that it takes off. Maybe this is the year that Tack can take that next step, really become that force that we need, and maybe Vic Beasley can be like decent. That would be good. So it's just it's not necessarily this most star-studded defensive line. Like, it doesn't have the high-end names that you see on some of like the premier defenses, but I think the depth from top to bottom is like just so solid. Like they're not going to have any bad pieces. There's not weak links out there necessarily. So maybe that will be enough with the hopefully good linebacking core and secondary for this defense to be like above average or better. Hopefully, that would, because I mean, how often has Matt Ryan had an above average defense? Like, I feel like once. The 2016 playoffs, maybe 2017, I guess.
Yeah, probably 2017 would be the best recently.
Yeah, and they almost beat the eventual Super Bowl winners with Steve Sarkisian calling that offense. So I mean, anything is possible with competent coaching in this roster. So we will see. But I'm trying to think of some other players that stood out to me. It was sure nice to see the starters out there and see, Ricardo Allen and Keanu Neal playing together in the backfield. That's real. That's always nice to see when guys come back from injury. Yeah, I mean there were a lot of guys that played well. I mean it wasn't quite as flashy as like the Jets game where we saw like Tyler Davison sumo some guy and just destroy him in the backfield or anything like that. Do you have any Rashid Hageman takes? Do you think that he's like a potential guy that's going to actually make it after his suspension, or is he pretty much done?
See a spot on the roster for him at this point.
Yeah, I know the fan base is like obsessed with Rashid Hageman, but look, I mean, the guy hasn't played a meaningful football snap in 2 seasons, and he was always known as someone who was not consistent. So with the depth they have at defensive tackle, it's just going to be really difficult for him to find a spot. Let's see. All right, moving back to the offense, we have a couple. Arguably the most interesting battle might be like the final wide receiver spots. And I didn't think that any receivers were like overly impressive in this game. Olamide Zaccheaus was like the only guy to actually be able to catch anything that Danny Etling threw, so I think he deserves like credit for that. But both Zaccheaus and Marcus Green like muffed punts again, and that's not what you want to see. And then when Danny Etling came into the game, like the passing game just evaporated. Like he was not capable of completing any passes, and he'd only been with the Falcons for like 2 days, so like I don't necessarily blame him entirely for that. But what is your take on who those last two receivers might be behind the presumptive, quartet of Julio, Ridley, Sanu, and Russell Gage?
Well, I think Justin Hardy's got a spot secured at this point, because I don't think anyone has been a standout to say that they absolutely deserve a spot on the roster above him. And he showed he had a fantastic catch, reminded us that he has some of the best hands on the team. I think, if we're looking at the guys who are competing for that final spot, you've got Marcus Green, who I think the team wanted desperately to take over that kick return, punt return position, and he just has not done it. And if anything, he has been really bad at it, muffing multiple punts and just not standing out in that regard. And I think that's really hurt him. Olamide Zaccheaus, they weren't even really trying him as a punt or kick returner earlier in camp. So I think the fact that they were doing that is sort of an indictment of Marcus Green. Yeah. And they do like Zaccheaus. They like him as a receiver. They like his long-term potential. And then you've got guys like Devin Gray, Christian Blake. Honestly, if I were to pick of any of those names right now, I would think Marcus Green gets points because he was drafted. Yeah. But I would actually right now give the nod to Zaccheaus to take that final wide receiver spot. I think if you were to ask me to flip a coin, I would put it between Zaccheaus and Marcus Green. But I think the only reason Green is even in the conversation is because he is someone they spend a draft pick on. Whereas Zaccheaus is a free agent, they probably feel like they would have more success stashing him on the practice squad than they would with Marcus Green. But if I had to take it on those two guys, I'd put Zaccheaus on the roster.
Yeah, I really do like Zaccheaus, particularly his long-term potential. He's got that dynamic ability. I swear he was listed at like 5'8", and he looks way taller than 5'8". Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, he looks like Devontae Freeman's listed at 5'8", and Zaccheaus looks way taller than Freeman. So I don't know what happened. Maybe he just got so hyped from like joining the Falcons that he grew like 2 inches. But he's been good. It seems like they really, really like Christian Blake, particularly as like a special teams person. Like, he was getting a lot of snaps. He was getting some snaps with Ryan. Because Julio wasn't playing, that sort of thing. Russell Gage was out. So, like, it seems like Cutter really likes Christian Blake. I personally like Zaccheaus better as, like, a receiver. But if they're factoring in, like, special teams contributions, it's possible Blake might have the leg up. And I really desperately wanted Green to win that return job, too. And it just doesn't seem like he's been able to do it. So, I think his only real path to a roster spot is to win that job. Or if they're terrified of losing him, to another team, in which case they would just have to sacrifice like Blake or Zaccheaus to keep Green. But it's a good problem to have that you have too many good receivers to keep. This is why we need bigger rosters. NFL, please, get on that. I think like Zaccheaus and Green both would have had like a shoe in to the roster if they could have won that return job, and just both of them just fell flat on their faces, unfortunately. But speaking of the return job, do you think it's basically Kenyon Barner, like, signed, sealed, delivered? Yeah.
Oh, has to be at this point.
Yeah. And I think Barner's looked good. Like, I've been encouraged by what I've seen of him, and he showed off that he can catch the ball. I mean, he had that really nice play. It was against backups, but, he caught the pass, and he made some nice moves, and he clearly has good field vision, and he doesn't drop the punt. Like, he hasn't dropped any punts this preseason, so
really low stand. Yeah.
He's a lot more of a dynamic option than Justin Hardy. I will give him that. Like, he offers you a lot more than Justin Hardy, so it's still an upgrade over what they had last year.
Truly.
So let's shift gears a little bit to some offensive line talk. Jamon Brown, James Carpenter still in intense battle for the left guard spot. Do you have a favorite there?
I think the team wants Brown to be the guy. He's a little bit younger. He's someone I think they envision slotting in there for the long term. I think Carpenter has more experience. He's seemed a little bit more solid. Although I think some of the stuff we saw from Brown got overblown. I don't think he was as bad as people thought he was, especially in the second preseason game. Right now, I would probably give a slight nod to Carpenter, but if Brown got the start, it wouldn't surprise me in a bit.
Yeah, I could see that for sure, and it's been an interesting battle because I agree with you. Like, for contract reasons and youth reasons and lots of things, it makes sense for them to want Jamon Brown to be like the long-term left guard starter. That seems to be what his contract indicates. Whereas Carpenter, they paid him like a lot up front, but his deal is easy to get out of after this season. So if they decide that they don't need to pay that much for depth, or they can't afford it, aka what could happen in 2020, they could pretty easily move on from him. Whereas Jamon Brown, he's not going anywhere until like 2022, I think. In terms of dead money and the money you save, it's just not gonna go anywhere. So long term, I agree with you that it's probably Brown, but this week, and going into week 1, I would not be shocked if it's Carpenter, because pass protection is the most important thing for this Falcons team.
Right.
It's always going to be the number one requirement for Falcons offensive linemen. And to their credit, they've tried to get guys that can do both, and they've emphasized that a little bit more with these bigger additions. Sabrelo and McGarry are both bigger than, bigger players. Obviously, Jamon Brown and James Carpenter are both like huge guards, like both athletic, very athletic, huge guards, which is, that's why
330 plus.
Yeah, like, and they both have terrific athletic testing. That's why Carpenter was a first round pick, and Jamon Brown was, I believe, a day 2 selection as well. So they've kind of targeted that big but still mobile guy to try to beef up that run game, and hopefully that will help. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to protect Ryan, because if he has time, he can shred teams, and that's the most important thing. So it might be Carpenter just because of that, but it sure would be nice to be able to be like, oh, like, Lindstrom or Carpenter or Brown, they need a few snaps off, or they need to like sit a game or whatever. Let's just have another completely starting quality guard come in and just take over and not miss a beat. That will be nice to have. And it could very well, mean the difference for this team in the long run if, God forbid an injury were to strike, to have that guy that you can immediately trust to come in and basically not have a tremendous drop off. That could be the difference between this team competing in January or having, Ben Garland at right guard and just torpedoing the season when as soon as we play the Rams, just the whole Aaron Donald's just like gonna eat his lunch and just end things. But I'm excited about the offensive line as a whole. I think a lot of people were super concerned after the Jets game, but did this Washington game give you some hope there?
Yeah, I think the Jets game was number one. You had Greg Williams on the other side, just blitzing like an idiot,
being an a-hole. Yeah.
That man is devoid of a soul. He is a horrifying human being. He shouldn't be coaching in the NFL anymore. He is arguably the worst person in the entire NFL right now. Morally bankrupt. Deserves to burn at the bottom of a pit mercilessly. So that's my thoughts on Greg Williams. But he was blitzing the snot out of the Falcons' offensive line, and they weren't game planning for it. That preseason game, they didn't come in looking to pick up stunts and blitzes, and I think that made them look a lot worse than they were. I think they did a little bit more game planning for this game against Washington. Washington has a very good defensive line as well.
Definitely, yeah.
I think that should be kept in mind. They did a much better job in this game of giving Ryan some time. So I felt much better after Washington. I thought the Jets game was overblown for the reactions that people were having to that, simply because Satan's sidekick Greg Williams was on the other side of the ball.
Yep. But yeah, I mean, look, DW, if we can't react crazily to the second preseason game, what can we do? Okay, I thought this was America. Like, I mean, it wouldn't be Falcons Twitter in the preseason if we didn't have a complete meltdown after like a preseason game in which the offensive line looks terrible. I think people have already forgotten that the Dolphins like eviscerated the Falcons O-line in 2016. And, you guys all remember what happened in 2016. The offensive line was fine. It's just like there's no game planning, and like the chemistry is still being built, and like you can look pretty bad if you get aggressive defense coming after you in the preseason. So it's a tradition at this point. Like Falcons offensive line looks bad in the preseason. Like, oh no, like are they going to be okay? And then they're always like serviceable at least. So I'm not like. Yeah.
Preseason.
Yeah. What would we do without preseason hot takes? I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving when you can go back and look at those terrible takes. Like the takes that said Caleb McGarry, Dimitrov should be fired for taking Caleb McGarry with his medical red flag, quote unquote. Look, folks, McGarry's already fully cleared to practice. It's not even the end of the preseason. So what is your thoughts on that whole McGarry situation? Are you like super impressed that he's able to come back so fast?
So, and you probably remember this in the writers' chat that we had when the news came out, and everyone saw cardiac ablation. It was like, oh God, cardiac. It's immediately has a big reaction to the fact that the term cardiac is in the phrase. Once we looked it up and we started reading on it and trying to get some information, I believe your brother-in-law.
Yeah, he's just finishing up medical school now. My brother,
Yeah, you got some information from him. And actually what we saw was somewhat encouraging. And it actually said for people who have had this procedure done before, success rate the first time around is like, 70 to 80% of them knocking out the issues. The second, third time, if they have to go for a follow-up, the success rate went up to like 85 to 95%.
Yep.
So the fact that McGarry was having it done as a follow-up to, what had been done in college, meant that more than likely this would probably be it. This would, take care of the issue once and for all. We were thinking 6 to 8 weeks. The fact that he's back this quickly is a strong indication that, I don't want to say he's never going to have an issue with this again, but I feel like the major concerns that people have were blown way out of proportion.
Yeah.
But yeah, really encouraging for him to come back this quickly, and we'll see if he contends to be a starter by game 1. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I could definitely see him on the field as a starter at right tackle sooner rather than later. Now that he's back this early.
Yeah, and you're exactly right with the procedure. Like, I feel like anytime you see the word cardiac, it's like everyone freaks out because a lot of some players we've seen retire recently based on enlarged hearts or heart conditions. We saw Maurice Hurst, who was a fan favorite last year, fall basically into day 3 because of his red flagged heart condition at the combine. And it terrifies people, and for good reason. But the procedure is very simple. Like how my brother explained it was that like some people are just born with extra pacemaker nodes on their heart, and those are like the cells that like control your heart rate. And every once in a while, those cells will like activate at the same time, and like it'll cause your heart rate to like skyrocket. So the procedure is they just basically go in and they just burn off the extra nodes. And the reason it's more successful with multiple procedures is because every time they do it, they try to find all of them and get rid of them. So like if it happens again, they're like, okay, we must have missed one, and then they go look for it really closely, and then they find it. So like after this is I think the 3rd time, like they have probably literally searched his entire heart for these things. Like there's only so many places they could be. So like hopefully this is the end of it, and it's not a big deal. But I agree with you that we could see McGarry starting I think by midseason. At some point. I mean, it really depends probably on how Matt Gono plays. Like, if Matt Gono is really, really good, then there's no reason to, like, force McGarry onto the field. But that's probably the best case scenario, is that they can take their time, let McGarry kind of acclimate, and then when they know he's ready, just, like, put him in there and just start hopefully dominating up front. I'm excited about this offensive line, especially if Gono's good, because that means that the depth is solid everywhere. We've seen that Wes Schweitzer can be, what looks like a trustworthy center behind Mac. We have depth at guard, we have depth at tackle. After getting burned last year with just no offensive line depth, I think they finally learned their lesson and said, okay, maybe this is the position we should pay a premium for depth instead of dumpster diving for everyone not on the starting 5. So sometimes including the starting 5. But all right, we should probably give some more love to the defense before we switch gears here. But I'm trying to think of like someone that I missed. I know like Ryan Neal's getting cut for sure. Like he's just been a disaster every game. Poor guy. Like he ended up on the roster at some point last year towards the end of the season, and he has great measurables, but he's just made so many bad plays. Man, it's just I cannot see him sticking around. Let's see. What do you think about? Yeah, Chris Cooper. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Go ahead. I'm Chris Cooper.
Yeah, I think he played a lot of nickel the past few games, and with KZ out injured, Cooper got a chance to step up, and he took advantage of it. He's I'm looking right now on my other screen, and he's actually one of our highest rated players in the Washington game. So he got 29 total snaps, which tells you, when you get that many snaps in the 3rd preseason game, it tells you the coaching staff is really doing some deep eval on you. And by that 3rd preseason game, if they're doing that sort of deep eval, I think it means, they're considering you as a potential for the 53-man to see, what does he look like throughout, 15, 20, 30 snaps. And he looked good. He actually played really well. And it wasn't just in this game. He played well against the Jets as well. So he's someone that I think could be a surprise addition to the roster as well. I believe they actually got him signed to a 2-year.
Yeah.
Maybe mixing that up with someone else. But
no, I think you're right. Yeah, no, I actually snuck Cooper onto the roster in my latest projection that came out, I think, Tuesday. Because you're absolutely right. Like with KZ and Sheffield, nursing what appear to be minor injuries, thankfully. Chris Cooper was the starter in the slot, which I think tells you a lot about how the team views his skill set. And he's technically a safety too. So I think he's a guy they could keep as a quote-unquote fifth safety, but as someone who can play at safety and corner as a reliable depth guy. That gives them some flexibility. And, I think he can play special teams too. So he could really have an inside track to the roster, particularly if they're concerned about, Sheffield or KZ's injury kind of lingering a little bit into the season. I think KZ is 100% going to play. I feel like KZ would have come back into the game if it was a real game, after they found out it wasn't something huge. But Sheffield, I think we're still kind of trying to figure out if he's going to be a full go for week 1. So that could really kind of seal the deal for Chris Cooper if there's any concerns there. All right. I know people want to know about the practice squad quarterback, arguably the most important battle of our time. So is this, is the simulator going to get another year is he going to get a chance at the squad, or is this, Danny Etling's job to lose, or are they just going to cut everyone and say screw it?
Oh God, I think they may look to see who else is out there, and I think this is an important thing to remember about the practice squad. A lot of times, when we get into the Sunday and Monday time frame, because they'll announce the 53-man roster Saturday 4 p.m. is the cutoff, and then they'll start working on the practice squad. And a lot of people, when they see that first edition of the practice squad, they'll see those 10 guys and like, oh, it's locked. And it seems like every single year we'll see 10 guys on the practice squad, and before we even get to the first game of the regular season, they will have made additional changes.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because they're waiting to see who else falls out from their teams. They're waiting to see, if someone they liked in the pre-draft process has suddenly become available. So I think at quarterback, maybe Sims, maybe Etling. I don't care. I honestly, both guys to me are. I think there's also a chance that they'll look elsewhere to see if there's another young quarterback that got cut. But I think it'll, flip a coin. It's completely indifferent to me.
Yeah, I think Etling maybe has a chance because he can replicate running quarterbacks and do some of that stuff. So they're gonna have to practice to play Cam twice. They're gonna have to practice to play Russell Wilson. So his skill set as a scout team quarterback, there could be some value there. And I think we know that they want Kurt Benkert is the guy that they really care about at the quarterback position. I was really looking forward to seeing him compete with Shaw, because if he could have replicated his first game and put that together, that might have been enough for the team to be all right, we're ready to move on from Shaw. But as it stands now, we're gonna have to wait till 2020, unfortunately. But I think they really like Benkert, and for good reason. I mean, that kid has a cannon arm. He throws that ball so fast. He probably needs to learn how to tone it down a little bit more than anything. But Matt Sims, I think, was just a body while they were trying to look at their options. And then Etling, he could be on the practice squad because of his ability to be a scout team guy, but it's not because they're trying to develop him long term or anything.
Oh no.
I don't think anyone they're bringing in really would have a realistic chance of beating out Benkert or Schaub next year. And speaking of Schaub, after that trash can game 1, he's been fine. He's been totally fine, which is just really funny. Because I'm pretty sure the exact same thing happened last year, where he was trash in the first game, and then Kurt Benkert played super well, and we were like, oh man, Schaub's gonna get kicked out. Is this the year? And then Benkert was terrible after that. But it's like a Falcons preseason tradition, freaking out about who's the backup quarterback.
Truly.
Yep. Good times. All right, let's shift gears into a little more roster talk. Because I think we basically talked about everyone that was even remotely interesting in the last preseason game. But all right, so a roster construction question, because I know you also like to nerd out over how many of exposition are they going to keep. So this is a shout out to you roster nerds out there. So the possibility of keeping 5 running backs is upon us, because Brian Hill and Quadri Olson both have looked good, and then Kenyon Barner now is looking like the returner. So do you think that the 5 running back thing is legit? This is something that we could see happen going into week 1?
I really do. And I think it will come at the cost, obviously, of them not carrying a fullback, which I think they don't need to. Luke Stalker can carry that role. And we saw in the last preseason game, the Falcons tried Jaden Graham,
Mm-hmm.
who we both think has a shot of making it as a third tight end.
Yeah.
They were trying him at fullback, which indicated to me that they are leaning towards not carrying a true fullback on the roster this year and using more hybrid guys, which I am fine with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think they will technically label Barner like a maybe they'll label him as a running back, but they're going to talk about him like a special teamer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a very real possibility we end up with 5 running backs on the roster this year.
Yeah, I think so too. And, it was basically like foreshadowing. Quinn said, like, well, we'd even consider keeping 7 receivers if one of them was the returner, that sort of thing. So he was basically leaving the door open. And I believe last year they started off the initial roster with 7 receivers. It wasn't the 9, quoted by the Beak or whatever. Well, however many it was more than 7. I'll tell you that much. But it's not going to be 9. I'll tell you that right now. But so we've seen that Quinn's like willing to keep quote unquote not normal numbers of players on the roster. But I think they would have liked it to be Marcus Green or somebody like that. But with Barner basically the only returner that hasn't fumbled multiple times, it's his job. So congratulations, Kenyon Barner. You win by default. Which you never really want to happen, but it's okay. And then you mentioned the tight end battle. I totally agree with you on the fullback front. Like, I don't think Ricky Ortiz offers you anything that Luke Stalker, maybe even Jaden Graham. Like, maybe like Jaden Graham's even can replicate what Ricky Ortiz does, and it's not meant to insult Ricky Ortiz, maybe a little bit, but
he's no Patrick DeMarco.
He's no Patrick DeMarco. Only there's very few fullbacks that you could put up on the pedestal of Patrick DeMarco, and unfortunately, none of them are in Atlanta, so that's not going to really work. And I like that the potential for some schematic and formation plays that you can do with like lining up Stalker as a tight end that's going to run a route and then having him move in to play fullback, and you can maybe catch the defense in some bad looks and things like that with that flexibility. But to me, the biggest question was, like, after they brought back Logan Paulson, who was, a good blocker for this team in 2018, I was like, oh, well, maybe this means they're going to keep 4 tight ends. Because, no one thought they were going to move on from Saubert. And then obviously Saubert's gone already, traded for peanuts. But now it's like, well, Jaden Graham looks really good. So, like, are they just going to forget Logan Paulson? And so what do you think about the tight end thing? Are they going to keep 4? Is it going to be 3? Who's doing what?
I really think it's going to be 3, and I think if you're looking at Paulson, he and Stalker are essentially the same player. Stalker has a little bit more positional flexibility, being able to slide in and play at fullback. So I would give Stalker the nod over Paulson. And then Graham, I think the thing with him is he's shown a lot as a receiving tight end. And I think he gets the nod, in that regard over Paulson. I actually think they're going to go with 3 tight ends. I think Paulson may be the odd man out here. And if they go with 4, it wouldn't entirely surprise me. But I think they like what they've got with Stalker. And honestly, Paulson was good last year. He hasn't looked particularly good this preseason. I don't know how much that's going to weigh on the coaching staff because they do know what he can offer, on a regular basis outside the preseason. But I think Graham has shown enough as a receiving option. They had him out there with the ones again that third preseason game, the week 3 preseason game, the dress rehearsal. They had him out there with the ones, which tells you a lot again about how the coaching staff was evaluating him. Is this a guy that can run with Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, the starting offensive line, Devontae Freeman? And I think he did enough to say he's clearly better than what Saubert was, and I think there's enough upside there that you take the risk of losing a Paulson to keep Jaden Graham and grow him because Paulson, I believe, is already over 30.
Yeah.
Jaden Graham is 24.
Yep.
Right. So go with the young guy. Go with the guy that can catch the ball. Go with the guy that you can train up, and that's how I see it.
Yeah. We got to thank Foyesade Oluokun I'm pretty sure it was Oluokun. You know, I don't have anything to back this up other than the fact that Jaden Graham and Foyesade Oluokun both went to Yale. But like they didn't sign Graham right out of, you know, undrafted free agency. It was like after they made some cuts, they brought in Graham, and you have to think it was like Oluokun was like, hey, like my teammate, you know, Graham, like he's really good. Like no one knows about him. Like you should give this guy a chance, and they did, and now he's gonna might make the roster this year. Like he's been so impressive. Like it has been one of the biggest, I think, surprises of training camp to see Graham. Like it was with the ones you're saying, like he like jumped over somebody or something like that, and I was like, oh look, Austin Hooper just made a play. Wait, no, that's Jaden Graham. Oh my gosh, like so that has been really good to see. Another, you know, perhaps diamond in the rough unearthed in undrafted free agency, and that's one thing I really do love about Quinn and Dimitrov working together is like they're not afraid at all to be like, oh, we found this undrafted guy, and actually he's better than like the two veterans we have, so we're gonna put him on the roster. Goodbye, veterans. Like we all basically assumed that Eric Saubert was safe because of his draft stock and the fact that he hasn't been bad. He just hasn't really done anything as a receiver. And they were like, okay, well, Jaden Graham, he's better. Okay, moving on. And you just, no, go ahead.
For fans, the only time you guys get to see these guys play is the preseason games. But I will also say, where Graham is concerned, he was standing out in camp. You know, when I went to camp and we were watching the plays happening in practice, it seemed like every other player were like, oh, who's this guy? Who's this guy catching the ball? And he was constantly catching balls, constantly making plays. And, you know, the coaches see that. The coaches they're not just weighing the preseason games. They're weighing, you know, what they're seeing in camp every single day. So he was someone that was already standing out before the first preseason game was played.
Yeah. And then the preseason, the training camp can really foreshadow the preseason, like in a lot of ways. Like with Russell Gage, you know, that was someone who stood out to me a lot while I was there. He was the most targeted player by Matt Ryan over the couple days that I was at camp. And then I actually saw Alex Gray getting all the targets at tight end the couple days I was there, which is funny because he's gotten like one target all preseason. But yeah, I mean, it is like something I would definitely encourage fans to do. Like if you have an opportunity to get down to training camp just for like a day, even to go check it out, you can really learn some interesting stuff. You can see some of the clues to start putting the puzzle together of like what maybe this team will look like in a couple weeks. But yeah, I'm excited about this offense because it just seems like they got weapons coming out of the wazoo. I mean, they got players everywhere. They have undrafted tight ends that are just shredding people in the preseason. They have, you know, 4 running backs that they have to keep because they all look good. You know, we're like talking about this huge battle for wide receiver 5 and 6 because there's like 4 guys that legitimately might deserve it. I mean, this offense is just so loaded. It's great to see. And it's not just like loaded in terms of top end talent. It's loaded from top to bottom. I mean, the wide receiver trio of Jones, Ridley, and Sanu. I mean, I just don't think there's any other trio that comes close to that one. So that it's going to be so much fun to watch. We haven't even gotten to see a glimpse of this offense with Julio in it. And I think that's like the cherry on top that takes it from being like, this is a good NFL offense to like, this is 2016, like redefining efficiency type offense.
Knock on wood.
Exactly. You know, we have to be able to, if we can't get hyped now, like there won't be another chance. So we have to like really take advantage of it. So moving to the defensive side, like we were talking about earlier, like, you know, Durant, Miles, and Austin Larkin. Do you think there is a path potentially for one or both of those guys to make it, or is it just the numbers just not in their favor?
I think the numbers aren't going to add up because you also have a guy like Justin Zimmer, and I think he's on the outside looking in, and he's had a really strong preseason as well. You know, if I think the team is going to lean towards keeping their 3rd-round pick, Deidrin Snott, on the roster, and he certainly proved that should be the case after last week's game. And honestly, you look from top to bottom, if they carry 9 defensive linemen, I don't see a spot for Larkin or any of the other guys. So it's going to be tough. You know, there could be some surprises. It wouldn't surprise me if you saw someone like Justin Zimmer sneak on, and you know, but at this point, I just don't think it's going to be feasible. They're gonna. I think Larkin is someone that they may try to stash on the practice squad. Thing is, there's a lot of teams out there that are watching these preseason games as well to see who they may want to try to snag, and it's a big reason why Matt Gono made the 53-man roster last year.
Yeah.
The rumors were that the Carolina Panthers were going to snag him if we tried to stash him on the practice squad.
Yeah.
So I think there's a very realistic possibility Austin Larkin gets cut and ends up on another roster.
Yeah, I agree with you. Larkin, I think, has been the more impressive of the two between him and Miles. I think Miles has a chance to make it to the squad. I think he's been good, but not like as flashy as Larkin. Larkin's had a bunch of splash plays, so there's no way that other teams haven't seen him. So I do expect him to get poached pretty quickly. But perhaps Miles will have a chance to make it. And then, like you said, like it would be really nice to be able to keep Justin Zimmer, but like I don't know if the math's gonna add up there either. Like you can't keep him over Deidre Senat. I'm sorry, that would just be extremely foolish. If you really liked Zimmer that much, you shouldn't have signed Tyler Davison. Like why did you sign Tyler Davison if you really wanted to keep Justin Zimmer? Like you're making it really hard for yourself. You're making it so you have to cut somebody. Like. Which I guess is a good problem to have again, but it's just the math doesn't add up there. So sorry guys, sorry to all those guys. But I'd love Zimmer to stick on the squad again, and we'll see what happens next year. But I guess I'm hoping at some point we'll get a first-round pick at defensive tackle. But it seems like that's never going to happen. So that is just going to be our Waterloo. I'm just going to keep predicting defensive tackle in the first round. It's just never gonna work out. My Ed Oliver dream. I'm still salty about Ed Oliver. So. We'll get over it someday, but looking at the rest, like I think cornerback is like totally settled. Like I think cornerback's been settled since like right after the draft, because when you add two corners in like the 4th and 5th round, like neither of those guys is getting cut unless they're awful. So That's already like 5, including the starters, and then I just don't think any of the other guys have impressed enough to replace the versatile Bleedy Ray Wilson. I didn't know. Do you have any corner takes there?
Yeah, if anyone's going to be a surprise cut in the corners, it'll be Bleedy Ray. If someone's going to take his spot, I think it'll be someone like a Chris Cooper.
Yeah.
Because right now, Bleedy Ray projects to be our dime corner, with KZ being the nickel corner.
Mm-hmm.
So really, when you're looking at Sheffield and the rest of the guys, they're probably it's going to be special teams, where they're going to see the majority of their snaps anyways. So even for someone like Bleedy Ray, he is at best going to see 5-10% of the defensive snaps at most, barring injury. So he could be a surprise cut in lieu of in favor of keeping someone like Chris Cooper, but I'd be surprised by that. So I think Cooper may get listed as a safety and get stashed on the team that way.
Yeah, that's kind of how I had it written down, was like Chris Cooper would technically be like a safety, but we know he could play corner. But yeah, I agree. Like if any of the corners is getting cut, it's not going to be Desmond Trufant. It's not going to be Isaiah Oliver. It's not going to be DeMonte Casey. It's not going to be Kendall Sheffield. And it's not going to be Jordan Miller. I don't know that's very common to have literally 5 of 6 cornerback spots written down in pen, probably before the training camp even started. But that's where we were at. And we know Bleedy Ray, he's going to be like a reliable veteran that's going to provide like solid play. So that's always nice to have in a pinch. Like somehow he came in and covered Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs and was not a train wreck. I don't know how that happened. That was the most impressive thing I've ever seen from Bleedy Ray Wilson. But so we know what he's capable of, at times. But if they were like really interested in one of these other guys, like none of these other guys other than Cooper has really done anything. Like maybe Jalen Myrick, I think they like him legitimately. He was a guy that got cut and they picked him up, recently. He has some potential, but like Ryan Neal, like I said, has been a garbage fire. I really do like Jason Stanley, the wide receiver convert from Georgia, but he's a practice squad guy. Like he's got the measurables. We know he's a good special teams player. That's basically all he did at Georgia, but not really ready for prime time in terms of like being a corner you can put on the field. So I like him as a squad stash, but it's just like Bleedy Ray by default unless they just fall in love with one of these other guys. So And then we talked about linebacker already in terms of the guys that we like there. I mean, it's Deion Jones, Campbell, Oluokun, Grace, and then I guess Riley. We'll see. But I know Delshon Phillips has his fan club out there. I just don't think that they're going to cut Duke Riley to keep Phillips, even though Phillips has been like a solid guy. But so at safety, I think I have Niesman and Ishmael as the backups. Is that where you're at as well with those?
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty solid about Ishmael because the team likes him. He's a veteran. He's played strong safety most of his career in the NFL. Niesman, for some reason, the team never seems like they're 100% on board with him, even though he plays well. So if they went with 4 safeties, I could see Niesman being a surprise cut.
Yeah.
Because they have surprise cut him in the past.
Many times, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, the early part of training camp, Niesman kicked Dan Quinn's dog or something and just pissed off the coaching staff, and they're like, oh, this guy's really good, but we hate his guts. Just don't want to, And so I don't know.
Yeah.
I do feel like that's the 4 I would go with, but, man, this team just seems like they've got some issues with Niesman that they're not disclosing, so...
Yeah, they subjected us to Jordan Richards for like 6 games before they put Niesman in. Like, I don't know any, this is like the poster child for sometimes NFL teams do stupid things because there was no universe in which Jordan Richards was even on the same plane of existence as Sherrod Niesman in terms of how good he was. And then we saw Sherrod Niesman finally get a chance, and he just outplayed Jordan Richards so bad that Richards ended up getting cut within by the end of the season. And it was just what are we doing here?
Exactly.
We saw Niesman play the previous season. We've seen him play in spurts, and he's just a solid starter. He can start and not embarrass you. So I just don't know. I don't know what else this man has to do to get a roster spot. It's not like starting safeties are just growing on trees and every team has an abundance of them. So it should be Niesman, but I agree with you that maybe he just might get cut because the team just doesn't. Maybe they don't like his name. It's hard to pronounce or something. I don't know. But yeah, we really have to get into the battles that people want to talk about. We were robbed, I think, of one of the most interesting training camp battles, which would have been the long snapper competition. Unfortunately, they cut the other long snapper after the first preseason game, so we didn't get to see that one play out. But are there any other players that you want to touch on or shout out before we wrap things up here?
I think someone I think that gets overlooked because we don't talk about him much is Isaiah Oliver.
Yeah.
And we've automatically slotted him in as a starter opposite the True Font. I was mentioning this the other day to the other Falcoholic writers. We haven't heard much about him. We've heard a lot about Russell Gage in his second year. We've heard a lot about Edo Smith in his second year. And, we hear a lot of these other guys getting talked about. And it seems like Oliver has been flying under the radar this entire preseason, which I think is probably a really good sign that he's just doing his job. And with as bad as Robert Alford was last year, I'm actually really looking forward to seeing Isaiah Oliver out there. I feel like he is not getting recognized, and maybe that's a good thing. He's doing everything he's supposed to be doing, and we just he's invisible on the field, which is what you want from a corner.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. He was so forgotten that I was having to beat away draft prospects with a stick because they kept projecting the Falcons stick a corner in the first round. I'm like, no. Did you even look at their roster? They literally drafted somebody in the second round last year and people forgot. Or and this is just, this is just people showing that they don't really follow teams very closely. When you draft a corner in the second round, he's someone you have plans for. So when they cut Robert Alford, it wasn't oh, well, it's time for them to draft another quarterback in the first round. It was no, they're just going to play their second rounder and not force him to the bench, So, shout out to those folks. But it's interesting because I think a lot of people view the corner position as one with a lot of bravado, and they're players that get talked about a lot. But I think Isaiah Oliver is just kind of a quiet player that's just going to be a quietly good player this year. I don't know that he's going to get a lot of accolades, or his style was never the really flashy, make a bunch of turnovers style like what KZ does. But he was just a really good corner, and I had him as a first round grade last year when he got drafted, and so I thought he was a super value for the Falcons to pick up in the second round. And I mean, his arms are just so long. Like he's the type. He's what the Falcons hoped they were getting in Jalen Collins. Except I thought his technique was much closer to being playable than Jalen Collins was at the time. And as far as I know, Isaiah Oliver isn't just like burning it down on the weekends to the point where he's going to get suspended like 10 times. So, so hopefully we won't have to worry about that. But Isaiah Oliver, I think he did play at Colorado, so there might be some questions there. But, I am really excited to see how he does, and he really is kind of like the linchpin of the defense in some ways, because I think if he plays really well, then you're talking about this secondary as like an elite secondary, because we know Trufant's going to be good. We know KZ is good. The safeties are both good. So if like the number 2 corner is really good, then this is like an elite secondary. And that could be huge for this team. So that paired with what looks like a quality defensive line for the first time in who knows how long, and a linebacking core that looks pretty strong, maybe not like elite level, but like we have Deion Jones who like elevates everything. And then the other guy just has to be like, solid to good. I just think the defense has all the pieces it needs to be good. And with Dan Quinn calling it, maybe that's the secret to the whole thing, is having Dan Quinn back there calling plays. I mean, are you hyped up about this defense?
I am. Someone asked me recently on a radio show I was on what coaching change I thought would be the most substantial. And I said Dan Quinn moving to defensive coordinator. We saw what he did in Seattle. When he was there, it was the number 1 defense in the league. We saw what he did at the tail end of 2016 when he pulled those rookies together and made them perform at a high level. I think we're already seeing some of that early in the preseason with this defensive line. There was an article recently about how he's got these guys just playing fast and not worrying about making mistakes, not worrying about blown plays, but as long as they're playing at a high speed, and that makes a difference. When these guys aren't playing timid or feeling like they're going to get coached up after every single play, you're going to see some of these guys just sort of let loose. And I think you'll see some plays get given up, during the season, but I think you'll also see a lot of big plays that go in their favor. Turnovers, sacks, fumbles. I'm really, really excited about this defense. Like you said, someone asked me as well, are you confident in this secondary? And I said, a surprising one. I said, I think this could end up being one of the best secondaries in the league. With Keanu and Ricardo coming back, if they stay healthy, KZ at nickel is a freaking ball hawk.
Yeah.
Trufant was playing well at the end of last season. I think people were overlooking that. He really brought it together, to close out the season. And Isaiah Oliver, potentially being an understated starter on this team. Defensive line, defensive secondary, some really fast linebackers. Man, this defense could be really, really fun.
Yeah.
They may still give up some plays and be frustrating at times, but I think they're going to have the potential to also be home run hitters, where they'll strike out at the plate, but then they'll turn around, 3 innings later and give you a 3-run home run. So
yeah.
That's a lot of fun. Those are the kind of the players in baseball that you follow and root for, and I think it's going to be the kind of defense that you're going to enjoy watching.
Yeah, and I think that they've had kind of really poor luck with turnovers. I know 2017 was like historically bad turnover luck in terms of like the opportunities they had, and they just couldn't convert them. And that does, everything regresses to the mean, and that's going to turn around for them at some point. And it got a little bit closer to average last year, but I think this team, they've been kind of just slowly putting together the pieces for this defense. And Quinn's, I think, finally got what he needs to make this into like a one of those defenses that, like, this defense doesn't even need to be like a great defense. It just needs to be like a good one. Then that would already be better than Matt Ryan has had his entire career. Like, just give the Falcons like a solid to good defense, and I think that they're just going to be it's going to be crazy. Yeah, they're just going to be such a good team if that defense can play well. And I'm really excited about Oliver because he finally gives them that matchup piece to match up with the bigger receivers. That was just the one thing they just didn't have. So we would just see Robert Alford getting mossed every play by Mike Evans, or like Desmond Trufant like trying and failing to also, get mossed by these just huge receivers. And a lot of teams have figured it out. You just need to have a guy that has the size to match up with those guys. And Oliver's athletic too. He can keep up. So I think that having that matchup piece to kind of neutralize, Oliver and safety help on the team's big number one, and you let Trufant just completely shut down the number two guy, and I think we're gonna see this defense really take off. So it's exciting. Hope springs eternal going into the fourth week of the preseason. So,
yep.
All right, well, guys, that is our hour. But before we get out of here, I do want to remind you, if you don't mind, to please like and subscribe to the video, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed our spicy take night. We do appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Solaire of Astora, JL Hunt, the usual guys, you know who you are, Tyler Raines, Don Emery, all of our usual guys that we see every single week. We appreciate you guys a lot. And the new folks, maybe you're tuning in for the first time tonight. Hit that subscribe button and see these shows coming up. They're going to be a weekly thing. During the season, we're going to get our post-game shows after the games. Those are a lot of fun as well. And then, like I said earlier, DW at Falcoholic DW on Twitter. Sometimes goes by David Walker, not usually. Not usually. But he, of course, is the host of that really, really good Falcoholic podcast with Gina Thomas. That is a terrific program as well. So you guys definitely need to check that out. But otherwise, DW, anything else that you're working on that you'd like to plug?
Yeah, just the stuff at thefalcoholic.com. I'll be hosting the post-game podcast this year, and we'll also have the Falcoholic Crossfire podcast coming back during the season as well.
Yes, definitely check that stuff out, guys. And like I said, terrific program. If you see this show and you're like, oh man, I really love this, you're gonna love their podcast too, because DW and Gina are just really, they have great chemistry. It's a great show. You guys would love that one as well. So I could give that a full recommendation. It's not just because we work for the same people. Okay, it's because it's actually good. So I'm not just saying this because this is my ad read that I have here. But otherwise, guys, I'm Kevin Knight. You can follow me at Falcoholic Kevin. The show is at Falcoholic Live. And thanks, guys, for tuning in with us. The off season is almost over. Next time you see me, I guess might be tomorrow at halftime if I really feel like it. No guarantees. But otherwise, it'll be next Wednesday, which will be just a few days before the regular season is about to get underway. So this is exciting times. I'm just happy we had you guys to help us get through this very dark period, in the NFL calendar. But the wait is over. We are almost ready to go into the regular season. So thank you for tuning in. We will see you guys in a week, and we'll have some real football to preview. So until then, I'm Kevin. He is DW. We will see you guys next time. Thanks.